So with 13.13, Akshan received a huge buff that makes his ult count as autos, which has many new interactions with items like Titans, Rageblade and Shojin. But one I wanted to point out specifically is his ult interaction with Runaan's, as this interaction means that Runaan's is one of Akshan's best in slot items. So in this video, I'll go over Akshan's interactions with items, his ideal comp, the best in slot items for Akshan, and augments that are very useful for him. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, 13.13 made Akshan's ult count as autos, but what's even more interesting is that each of Akshan's shots during his ult individually count as an auto. This can easily be seen if Akshan has a Rageblade, as he will get 6 stacks on Rageblade during his ult. But in this footage, Akshan got the 7th Rageblade stack during his ult channel, so where is that 7th stack coming from? Well, as it turns out, the Deadeye proc also counts as an auto. It will grant 10 mana and will also stack things like Rageblade, Shojin and Titans. And that also means that Runaan's will also proc 6 times on his ult and once on his Deadeye proc. Now Runaan's gets even more interesting and this footage should show you why. So you can see that even though Akshan's ult is completely focused on Jinx, all of the Runaan's bolts hit Jace. So what's happening here is that during Akshan's ult, he's technically autoing the unit that he locks onto, and so Runaan's will fire a bolt to the nearest enemy, which tends to be another backline unit next to Akshan's target. So this means that Akshan with Runaan's will always have backline access through Runaan's, even if his ult doesn't fully connect if it was blocked by the frontline. And these bolts can deal a very substantial amount of damage, especially with AD items like Deathblade or augments like Double Trouble or You Have My Sword. So going forward, I believe that Runaan's is one of Akshan's best items, and Akshan is one of the best users of Runaan's in this entire set, as he's guaranteed backline access with this item. But of course, you can't guarantee a Runaan's every time you play Akshan. So what about the other items? Are there others that can capitalize on Akshan's buff in 13.13? Well, firstly, I decided to look into Shojin to see if he could chain ults like Jinx did before her hotfix. But as it turns out, Akshan is mana locked during his ult and will not gain any mana whatsoever even if he has triple Shojin. And this makes complete sense because if Akshan wasn't mana locked, then a single Shojin would be enough to allow him to perma-cast, as each of the 6 bullets would grant him 15 mana. But that's not to say that Shojin is awful on Akshan, as he can still cast a lot sooner with the mana generation on both his autos and the Deadeye procs. So Akshan is still a very good Shojin user. And in the same way Akshan procs Rageblade 6 times, it would also proc shimmer items like Draven's Axe and Gambler's Blade. Okay, so how does more than one Runaan's work on Akshan? Well, as we can see here, another Runaan's will fire another bolt that will hit the second nearest unit to Akshan's ult target. The Runaan's bolts can only hit unique targets and you can't have multiple bolts hitting the same target, and the bolts will never hit the unit Akshan is autoing. Anyway, while it's not that useful, Akshan can also proc Shiv 6 times during his ult. But what's extremely useful is that this also applies to Titans, and Akshan can stack Titans extremely quickly, which allows him to ramp up his AD and AP rapidly and even get some tankiness on top. So even though they're unconventional, Titans and Shojin can actually be very decent damage items for Akshan. And surprisingly, multiple Runaan's isn't bad, as Akshan will gain even more backline access. Now, before I talk about what items are best in slot for Akshan, I should go over Akshan's comps and ideal traits, as they have a massive impact on his items. With any Akshan comp, I highly recommend that you always play at least 3 Shurima and at least 2 Freljord for their bonuses. Freljord will usually proc just before Akshan ults, so the shred will apply to the enemy board and will maximize the damage from his ult and the Runaan's bolts. You can deal as much damage as possible to the enemy backline even if they're tankier with augments like Unified Resistance. And even if Akshan's ult is blocked by the frontline, he will still deal a very substantial amount of damage. And with Shurima, Akshan will usually ascend just after his first cast, and so he will gain a lot of attack speed, which will allow him to cast again much faster. And Shurima will also heal Akshan every few seconds, so he doesn't need sustain. In this setup, the chill from Ashe and Sejuani paired with the mana reef from Free Freljord can slow down your enemy board substantially. This will mean that the enemy carries will auto a lot slower and take much longer to cast, and this will heavily swing the matchup in your favour. Also, I think that Ashe is really nice in this setup if Sejuani has HP items. Usually Akshan can struggle with tanks, but Sejuani's passive allows those tanks to get melted due to the true damage. So Ashe can do a lot of damage with just attack speed, as she can ult to apply a wide cone of chill and then auto for some AD damage and a lot of true damage, again if Sejuani has HP items. Ashe's wide cone of chill can also hit the enemy carry and slow them down. Also, Lissandra's ult is really nice if you need a Morello applier, and whoever her ult hits takes 10% more damage, so Lissandra can help getting through that front line. Both Freljord and Shurima combined allow you to go pure damage on Akshan, as you don't need shred, sustain or attack speed. Although I should add that cybernetic leech is amazing on Akshan, and having shred through something like Last Whisper on Ashe is still nice to apply shred before the Freljord storm hits. Okay, so with all things considered, what are the best in-slot items for Akshan? Personally, I believe that the two best items that you should always prioritize on Akshan are Deathblade and Runaans, and the last item can vary depending on what you have. But ideally, that is something like Guardbreaker, Infinity Edge, Giant Slayer, or even another Runaans. Although you should note that you can't crit on the Runaan's bolts, so Infinity Edge will not capitalize on Akshan's ult interaction with Runaans and boost the bolt's damage through crits. But it will still allow Akshan to completely shred and demolish units with his autos and ult. On the other hand, Guardbreaker can capitalize on this Runaan's interaction, as those bolts can proc the Guardbreaker effect. The bolts won't have their damage increased, but Akshan's autos and ult will. So Guardbreaker can be amazing here due to how easy it is to proc the bonus damage. Anyway, I would recommend avoiding Rageblade on Akshan, as the damage is way more valuable and Akshan spends far too much time in his ult channel. His mana cost is low enough that you don't really need to care about the Rageblade attack speed, as the Shurima attack speed and the mana from the Deadeye procs is enough to keep him casting. And you want Akshan to cast as much as possible so we can delete the enemy backline. Rageblade would also mean that Akshan will ult before the storm hits, so he can waste his first ult into a mega tank. Titans is actually a very decent alternative to Deathblade, as Akshan can stack Titans very effectively and quickly with his ults. Titans grants a very substantial amount of AD and AP, which significantly boosts his ult's damage, and the armor and MR has great synergy with the Shurima healing, as he has to take more damage to lose the same amount of HP. This can be really good into rogue matchups. For Ornn items, I find Gold Collector to be the best. Akshan's target and focus will be squishy units in the backline, so being able to maximize his damage against those units and potentially one-shot them is the best case scenario. Gold Collector can also farm a very substantial amount of gold through both Akshan's ult and the Deadeye procs. Sniper's Focus is also a great option after its slight rework in 13.14, and it will now grant 1 hex range. So with Deadeye, Akshan can have a very large range, which keeps him very safe. But if Akshan has more than 15% bonus attack speed, he will cast before the Freljord storm hits, and he may waste his ult's damage. Likewise, Infinity Force is also a good option, but it grants Akshan a lot of mana, so he will also cast before the Freljord storm. There are tank Ornn items that are great, like Eternal Winter and Anima Visage. In particular, Eternal Winter on Sejuani deals a disgusting amount of true damage, as the units that also her will be chilled, and so can take true damage through Sejuani's passive. But the Runaan's bolts and the Deadeye procs do not proc this true damage. In terms of Radiant items, I think the best for Akshan is easily Radiant Runaans, as those bolts will deal 100% AD damage and mean that Akshan is effectively ulting 2 targets at the same time and can completely demolish the enemy backline. Other Radiant items like Radiant Deathblade and Radiant Infinity Edge are decent alternatives, but these items won't result in nearly as much backline damage as Radiant Runaans. I actually think that Radiant Giant Slayer and Radiant Guardbreaker would be far better due to their insane damage multipliers. However, I haven't been able to personally test them out on Akshan, so if you do, let me know how it feels. But overall, Akshan's best build revolves around Deathblade and Runaans. The last items can be whatever you hit. Usually the last item is Infinity Edge or Guardbreaker, but you can find a lot of success with another Runaans. And if you get a choice of Radiant items, it is always Radiant Runaans, and if you get the choice of Ornn items, it is always Gold Collector. And remember, for Akshan, Titans is a good alternative to Deathblade. So what Legends and Augments should you take for this Akshan comp? I've been using Twisted Fate so I can get Pandora's Box for this Akshan testing, but I highly recommend that you don't use him, as you can lose a lot of board power and you don't need to use Twisted Fate to get these items. Augments like a cut above are better than Pandora's in this case, as not only do you get a Deathblade instantly, but you can earn a lot of gold through the augment, which you can use very flexibly by either leveling or re-rolling. Augments that give items are very good in general in set 9. So this can be augments like Radiant Relics, Portable Forge, All That Shimmers, and some legend augments like Big Grab Bag. Ezreal and Earth are the legends that have access to the Grab Bag augments, and these legends can allow you to have more items than your opponents, and this gives you a lot of options on how you itemize your board. With Earth, if you get a Shurima spat, then you can drop the third Shuriman, which is usually Cassiopeia, and give the spat to another Bruiser or Juggernaut so they can regen some HP every few seconds and continue to tank. You can then replace Cassiopeia with a better invoker like Rise. Alternatively, if you get a Deadeye Spat, I like to give it to units like Belveth or Heimerdinger so they can stack Rageblade extremely quickly. Deadeye Spat is actually a decent mana generation item, as the proc will give your units 10 mana. Anyway, you can also play Ornn to guarantee Ornn items if you want to go down that route. And as usual, Poro is great for flex play and to have as many augment options as possible if you want to maximize your chance of getting augments like a Cut Above or All That Shimmers. But personally, I don't think the legend choice is absolutely necessary, and you can just pick one around your preferred playstyle, as a lot of the portals like Thresher's Sanctum, Scottlepodle, Shuriman, Bazaar, and so on can make up for your item deficit. Also, I like both of the Freljord portals for a guaranteed Ornn or Radiant item. Likewise, on this board, I think Freljord augments like Freljord Heart or Glacial Storm are great as well, as Vertical Freljord is very easy to reach for the board-wide stun, and Glacial Storm provides a significant amount of shield power and stall while ramping up the attack speed of your units. Of course, a lot of the standard augments are great too, like Long Distance Pals, Gifts from the Fallen, Unified Resistance, Red Buff, Social Distancing, Jeweled Lotus, and so on. But I really like Jeweled Lotus, as you can forego Infinity Edge on Akshan and you can go for even more damage items like Guardbreaker or Giant Slayer. And as I mentioned before, Cybernetic Leech is amazing, as Akshan can heal for loads with this augment. Finally, I think leveling or reroll augments like March of Progress or Golden Ticket are great as well to enable rerolling at 7 for Akshan 3 and Lysandra 3. But yeah, in this dominant Azir Lux and Kai'Sa Yasuo meta, Akshan has proven to be a very reliable and viable carry that you can either reroll or tempo into another carry. And I imagine this will be the case going into the next patch after these dominant comps get nerfed. So hopefully this video gives you some insight and allows you to be ahead of the curve. But yeah, what do you guys think about Akshan? Do you think Deathblade and Runaan are truly his best in slot, or is it something else? Have you tried Akshan before, or are you looking forward to playing him? Let me know in the comments and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.